Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this. A classroom with polished wooden desks, chalk dust hanging in the air, and the steady tick of a wall clock. The smell of sharpened pencils and floor wax lingers as children line up in silence. In the 1950s, school wasn't just a place to learn. It was a place where order ruled every part of your day. The rules were firm, sometimes strict, and often surprising to us now. Today, we're looking at 10 more school rules from the 1950s that would absolutely shock you. Some of these may sound harsh, others downright strange, but all of them paint a picture of a world where childhood looked very different than it does today. Rule number 1. Pressed and polished. Back then, stepping into school was almost like stepping into church. You had to look your best. Boys were expected to wear slacks, pressed shirts, and often even ties. Girls wore dresses or skirts, never pants, and always neat. Teachers checked appearances as if it was part of the lesson. Jeans, sneakers, and t-shirts were simply out of the question, considered sloppy or rebellious. One old student remembered being turned away at the schoolhouse door just for wearing denim, told to go home and dress like a young man. It was all about discipline and pride. Schools believed that a sharp outfit meant a sharp mind. The rule slowly faded as the 1960s brought a youth culture revolution, where self-expression mattered more than pressed collars. But in the 50s, neat clothes were as much a rule as multiplication tables. Rule number 2, stand and deliver. If the teacher walked into the room, every child knew what to do. Stand up straight beside your desk and greet them in unison. "Good morning, Miss Davis," echoed like a choir through the classroom. Posture was everything. No slouching, no leaning, no hands stuffed in pockets. It wasn't just about politeness, it was training. Schools wanted students to practice discipline, respect, and readiness. Some even required students to stand before answering a question, speaking clearly with hands by their side. Today that might feel theatrical, but back then, it was just everyday manners. By the late 20th century, these rituals slowly vanished, replaced by more casual classrooms. But the memory of an entire class rising to attention like soldiers has never quite faded. Rule number 3, whispering halls. The hallway wasn't a playground, it was practically a library. Talking between classes was frowned upon, and some schools even banned running or laughing in the corridors. Hall monitors, often older students with sashes or badges, kept watch. A stern look or a quick note could land you in detention. The idea was simple. Learning was sacred, and silence protected it. Even recess had its own restrictions. No screaming, no wild running, just orderly play. To modern kids, it might sound like prison, but in the 1950s, the hallway was another extension of the classroom. As schools grew bigger in the decades after, controlling silence became impossible, and the rule faded away. But back then, whispering in the hall could feel as daring as breaking the law. Rule number 4, rock and roll. Jail. When Elvis shook his hips on TV, adults gasped in horror, and schools followed suit. Rock and roll was banned in many classrooms. Records weren't allowed, dances were supervised to keep them decent, and even humming a forbidden tune could get you scolded. Teachers believed this music was wild, rebellious, and even dangerous for young minds. One student recalled that their school sock hop didn't play a single Elvis song. Only waltzes and jitterbug were allowed. Rock was treated as if it were a disease that could infect the whole school. Of course, kids found ways around it, sneaking radios under desks or humming Chuck Berry on the playground. By the 1960s, schools couldn't hold back the tidal wave of rock and roll. But in the 1950s, stepping out of line with music could get you in real trouble. Rule number 5, the dunce cap. The pointed paper hat, tall and humiliating, was a fixture in some classrooms well into the 1950s. Misbehave, fail to answer correctly, or act out, and you might be sent to the corner with a dunce cap on your head. It was less about punishment and more about shame. The message was clear: don't be the fool in class. Many children dreaded it more than paddling. Sitting in silence while classmates stared was deeply embarrassing. Eventually, educators realized this humiliation did more harm than good, and the practice slowly died out by the end of the decade. Today, The idea of forcing a child to wear a cone of shame feels cruel. But in the 50s, it was simply considered discipline. Rule number 6. Separate worlds. Boys and girls might have shared the same school, but their experiences were carefully divided. In some places, boys and girls even had separate entrances to the building. They sat apart in classrooms, lined up in different rows, and had entirely different playground games. Teachers reinforced the divide with rules about behavior. Girls had to sit modestly, while boys had to stand tall and strong. The separation extended beyond the classroom. Gym classes were strictly divided, and dances often kept students on opposite sides until a teacher called them together. The belief was that boys and girls had different destinies, and school prepared them for those roles. By the 1970s, gender equality laws erased many of these practices, but in the 1950s, separate but equal applied not just to race in some regions, but to gender everywhere. Rule number 7. Writing on the board. Lines were the punishment of choice. If you spoke out of turn, you might spend an hour at the chalkboard writing, "I will not talk in class," 100 times. Teachers swore by repetition as a way to drill discipline. The clatter of chalk on slate became a soundtrack of shame. Sometimes students were made to stay after school just to finish their punishment lines. Imagine standing in front of the class, arm aching, as your peers quietly watched you scribble the same sentence over and over. It was tedious, it was boring, but that was the point. Eventually, modern teaching practices saw little benefit in this, and the punishment faded. But for many 1950s kids, the chalkboard wasn't just for math, it was for paying penance. Rule number 8. No jeans or tees. Casual clothing had no place in the classroom. Jeans were for farm work, t-shirts were for undershirts, and sneakers were for gym only. A boy who wore denim risked being sent home. Girls had it stricter still. Skirts or dresses only, no exceptions. Schools believed clothing set the tone for learning, and casual meant careless. One teacher even remarked that a child in jeans looked half-dressed. Students often wore their Sunday best to school, polished shoes and all. The change didn't come until the cultural revolutions of the 1960s and 70s, when students demanded freedom of expression. But in the 1950s, even a comfortable pair of jeans was considered an act of rebellion. Rule number 9. Stand to attention. Respect for authority wasn't just expected, it was enforced. If the principal entered the classroom, students had to stand in silence. If a teacher called your name, you stood tall before speaking. Any backtalk, no matter how small, was treated seriously. This wasn't just about order, it was about creating future citizens who respected hierarchy. In a time shaped by war and national pride, obedience in school mirrored obedience in society. Kids learned quickly that arguing with a teacher wasn't an option. Over time, classrooms grew more democratic, but in the 1950s, the rule was crystal clear. When an adult spoke, children stood to attention. Rule number 10. Polite posture forever. Even the way you sat at your desk was regulated. Girls were reminded to cross their ankles and fold their hands neatly. Boys had to keep both feet planted and backs straight. Teachers corrected posture constantly, tapping desks or snapping fingers if you slouched. Books had to be stacked neatly, pencils sharpened, and hands folded when not writing. It wasn't just about manners. It was about creating order in a world that prized discipline. By the late 20th century, teachers realized that comfort sometimes mattered more than formality, and posture rules faded away. But in the 1950s, even resting your head on your desk could earn a sharp reprimand. And there you have it, 10 more rules from the 1950s that would absolutely shock today's students. Some were about respect, some about appearance, and some about control. Together, they show a school system that valued order above all else. Which of these rules surprised you the most? Did your parents or grandparents ever tell you about these school days? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your stories. And if you enjoyed this trip back in time, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us again for more memories here on RetroNest.